All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about integrated pest management, also known as IPM. And this is for our Video 301 Bud Break to Harvest course for the online portion. This section was referenced from chapter 20 of the Grape Grower's Handbook, and that starts on page 241 for all of you guys that are following along with the textbook. So let's go ahead and get started. So integrated pest management is a balanced scientific approach for attacking diseases, pests, insects, and also weeds in vineyards. It's important because instead of just hitting farmlands or crops with like extreme intense chemicals, we want to make sure that we take the steps to manage carefully and things that are better for the environment. And also, there's a lot of beneficial organisms in our vineyards and crops and on our land around us, right? So we don't want to just use something that sweeps out all life. We want to encourage a positive ecosystem and environment in our crops. We want to preserve the beneficial species and manage the ones that can do harm to our crops, right? So it's a much more balanced approach to managing your crops. So this involves using multiple strategies and taking action to anticipate pest outbreaks to limit damage to your crops. So the best thing we can do to manage these pests is understand them on a deeper level. When do they hatch? When do they spawn? When do they start flying? Depending on the pest that you're dealing with, anticipate when the outbreaks will happen and then treat accordingly in a way that's better for the environment, right? So it starts to make sense the more we talk about it, right? So the goal altogether is to prevent pests, not to eradicate them, with the least risk and least impact on the surrounding environment, right? And so for an IPM program to be successful, it's very site specific. Your combination of pests or disease pressures that you face can be a lot different than other sites. You might have one block specifically in your area that is more prone to something than something else because it's closer to a body of water or something. So it's very site specific. It's really personalized program for the vineyard itself. Cool. So benefits, right? Obviously, the first goal and most selfish goal is to protect the grape quality and yields. Like, farmers' livelihoods depend on their crops. So we need to have quality and good yield so that way they can pay the bills and they can also provide a good product as well, right? It's a win-win. We also want to take the environmental standpoint on this too. So you want to reduce pesticide resistance in pests. If, same thing with like medicine and antibiotics, pests can become resistant to these things. If you use it too much, you use it all the time, they start to develop. That's just part of like their evolution, the survival of the fittest, right? They will mutate, they will start to become resistant to it, and then we'll have an even greater problem on our hands that we can't use pesticides to fix, right? Or we're going to have to scramble and find a new way to fix this pest problem, right? So we don't want that resistance to form. We also want to make sure we're preserving the beneficial organisms in our vineyard. So not all insects are bad, obviously, especially for our crops. There's a lot of beneficial pollinators. There's insects that we can use to our advantage. We'll talk about that as predators for other insects that might harm our crops, right? My favorite example of this is ladybugs. Ladybugs eat aphids. I grew up with a rose garden in my family, and we would just buy bags of ladybugs and release them into the rose garden. And it was always so fun as a kid to have like a bag of ladybugs you could just buy. That always blew my mind. But yeah, you release them and they go basically on an aphid eating buffet. Make sure that you have a body of water nearby they can drink, and then generally they will stay in the area. So that's kind of a cool way to manage things, right? Instead of just dousing everything in chemicals. Also, IPM supports long-term vineyard health and sustainability. So again, just tweaking things where you need to instead of just applying a broad spectrum of chemicals on top of everything. And we don't always want to be reliant on chemical pesticides. They are helpful, they do work, but we need to consider what our impact is on the environment. Okay, so overall there's like 6 major steps to IPM, or integrated pest management. One is pest detection. So be able to detect if the pest is present or not. Step 2 is pest identification. You have to correctly identify what type of pest is in your vineyard. You have to look at either if you can find the pest itself, or you can identify it by looking at its body type, putting it under a magnifying glass, or the type of like wear and tear it leaves behind, the chewing, biting marks, or stippling on leaves. So you have to properly identify the pest, or else the treating methods that you apply may not be very, like, what's the word I'm trying to say? Sorry. Effective, right? You might be trying to apply something to attack moths, but your problem is something else. So you have to properly identify what you're working with. Next is pest and environmental monitoring. So you found the pest, you have identified exactly what it is. Now we're going to monitor it and see how it's doing, how it's progressing, and if your treatments are working, right? And then step 4 is timely action. So action, the steps that you make at certain times of the year to mitigate this pest or to prevent it from hatching or spawning in your vineyard, and attacking it while it's still vulnerable rather than its adult stage. So timely action is very important. Step 5 is selection of the best tool, right? So we're going to find out that there is a series of steps and methods for integrated pest management. We can take different types of controls. We'll learn about that very soon. Then step 6, record and evaluation. You want to make sure that you are recording everything that you're doing. You know exactly what parts of your vineyard are affected. They're properly marked. We're taking notes to see the progression. We're evaluating to see if it's successful or not. Evaluating the crops. Were the crops damaged? Were they not? But then also keeping note that this might be a problem the next year. We can take the steps to prevent it from happening the following season. So all around, there are 6 steps, right? And you might see different renditions of this across the internet, but they all kind of follow the same general ideologies, right? So for a disease or for damage to happen, and we'll talk about this also in our next presentation, which is going to follow vineyard diseases and with bacteria and fungi and all that fun stuff. So for this to happen, there are 3 elements that need to come together. You need to have a host, a pathogen or pest, and a favorable environment for that pest to live, basically, or proliferate. So the host in this case is the grapevine itself. This is what produces our crop of grapes. The pathogen or pest could be leaf hoppers, spider mites, moths, etc. And they have to be present for this to happen. Then there also has to be a favorable environment. So the nutrients that the pest likes, a lack of predators need to not be there, right? Predators can't be there. And then they start to proliferate and exist. So it's kind of a triangle of all 3 things. And you don't get that disease or that pest pressure unless all 3 things are present. So we'll talk about this more in our vineyard diseases section next lecture. But think about that. So for integrated pest management, we can't remove the grapevine. The grapevines are planted where they are. The vineyard can't move. There's not too much we can do to remove that from the situation. The pathogen and pests has been kind of the traditional way of dealing with agricultural problems. We just douse everything with chemicals. But in the situations for integrated pest management, we really start to look at how can we tweak the environment to make it less suitable to live for the pests that we don't want around, right? But also making it an environment that the beneficial organisms that we do want in our vineyard do stay and do continue to help the environment that we're in. So think about that. Okay, so step 1 is monitoring pests. So it's really important that you regularly scout your vineyard for pests and damage. It can proliferate very quickly, it can spread very quickly, so they often recommend that you walk through your vineyards once a week if you know that there is a problem to monitor it. But otherwise, if you do own a vineyard, chances are you're going to be in it quite a bit. It's a lot of work, so definitely keep an eye out. If you do hire a crew, crews are generally very well educated in vineyards. Of course, it's their specialty, so they will most likely say something, but it is important that you are aware as the owner of the property of what's going on and to treat it appropriately, just like you would a house or your car or anything else, right? Going to make sure that you're aware of what's going on. So it's important too that you have the correct identification of what's going on in your vineyard to avoid unnecessary treatments. It's going to cost you money and time and lots of headaches. So to successfully monitor your vineyard includes making accurate identifications of pests and related crop injury present in the vineyard, determining the abundance of pest populations. Is it just in one section near the water? Is it all over the vineyard, or is it just in one block? So this will be important that you go out and you flag certain areas where you see this. And then also it's important to know the crop stage and management practices during that time, and also carefully recording all your vineyard observations as well, right? So all can be part of that. And sometimes it's not pest damage. Sometimes it's something else that the plant gives similar symptoms to, right? So it's important to check everything. So there's different types of monitoring and identification. One is visual observation. So this is really good for aphids, spider mites, psyllids, and arthropods that do not fly. They'll be crawling all over the plant itself. So you should be able to, by looking under leaves and across different parts of the vine, to identify and see these little critters. This can also be used for immature stages of pests, such as like immature white flies when they're still crawling and they're not into their flying stage of their development yet. And so oftentimes you'll see a viticulturist or a vineyard manager have what's called a hand lens. And this is like this little pocket lens that identifies up to 10x. And it's recommended to help not so you can see the species probably with your bare eyes, but if you want to get a closer look and actually identify what it is, the hand lens is very helpful in helping you actually see all the little pieces of the little parts of the bugs. For the frequency of your scouting, it's really important that it's the same person scouting the vineyard every time, because you'll just know the parts that you know and you can keep consistent record of like what you saw and what you didn't, right? Generally speaking, weekly intervals are important until there's no longer a serious threat of pests. So just making sure, checking in, seeing how it's progressing, if it's getting worse or if it's getting better, if you have a pest problem. So, and then general inspection includes starting at the very bottom of the plant and proceeding upwards. So it would start at the base of the vine, looking around, do you see any bugs, anything like kind of nesting into the bark, move your way up the scion, up into the cordons, or whatever training system you have, if it's a head trained. Then look up into the older leaves, the younger leaves, and then eventually the new growth, right? And then you can take notes about what's happening, if you see bugs or pests, or if the vine is acting in an odd way, take notes about like what's happening in its morphology. So scouting patterns depend on the size and shape of your vineyard. No one really has time to walk up and down every single row. So whether it's every other row, or if you do an M shape on alternating sides, or depending on, it just depends on the shape of your vineyard and what makes sense to you. If you find affected plants, it's really important that you mark them. So you can take that little training tape, that green tape that we use to tie down plants to like a post or something. You can use that to tie it onto certain parts of the training wires, or something bright like a high visibility orange color that you use for like construction. Whatever helps you find those affected areas so you can easily come back and check on them again so you don't lose your spot. So that is very, very helpful. There's also another thing that you can do for pest detection, and I think this is really, really cool. It's kind of sad for the plants, but it's a early pest detection process by basically planting what's called an indicator plant. Indicator plant, what I like to call them, are sacrificial plants, because if a pest is going to, it's a plant that has been deemed as one that is highly susceptible to certain diseases and pests, making them like the first to be attacked, and an early detection system before it attacks your vines. So vines are generally pretty resilient plants. They're, parasites of structures. They love to climb. They're very resilient. They can get by with very little water and nutrients, right? So it's a planting these other things, it tends to be a sacrifice, right? But it can be an indication to let you know that disease is present in your vineyard, and then that your vines are at risk before your vines actually become damaged, right? So one of the most famous examples of this are rose bushes. Rose bushes are highly susceptible to fungal diseases like powdery mildew and black spot. So you'll often see rose bushes planted at the end of vineyard rows. It's very pretty. It just kind of helps with the romanticism of vineyards, I believe. It's one more thing to prune. It's one more thing to take care of. But, customers, when they come to vineyards, really do enjoy seeing them. I've heard a couple of vineyard owners argue that they don't like planting indicator plants because they're worried that it might encourage that pest to come into the vineyard. And I see some merit behind that, but it's really a personal choice. So it's up to you. We also have a really cool article from English wine producers about indicator plants, but also companion plants. So we've talked a little bit about cover crop, not so much in this class, but in Vidi 303, happens in the fall. Cover crop is something that we plant in between our rows to help the soil structure, fix nutrients back into the soil, but it also brings beneficial insects and organisms to the vineyard, right? So it can be a selection, it can be a mix of different grasses and flowers and like radishes and stuff like that. So cover crop has been the most common term for it in the wine industry, but some people do call plants like these companion plants. Companion plants are planted in addition to your crop to help enhance the biodiversity, improve the soil health. A lot of them can act as a natural pest control. It also helps to suppress other weeds, and it can help with your microclimate regulation even as well. So you can read more about that from the English Wine Producers article we have posted here. It's interesting because for weed suppression, it's not just a matter of like outcompeting the space against weeds. There's actually like a, whether it's a hormone or it's a chemical that certain types of plants will emit that discourages other plants from growing around it. So there's like actual chemical warfare happening in addition to a physical space fight off, which is really interesting. So some of the plants that were listed on this website and their benefits. So lavender will help repel aphids. Also, lavender is super, drought resistant. Doesn't take a lot for lavender to grow. It can be rather bushy, so it might be something you plant at the end of your vineyard and not so much in the center rows. We also have marigold, and I've seen a lot of field marigold at Boger Winery specifically. It's a very pretty plant. Regular marigolds are much larger. You see them like a lot in they'll use them a lot for decor and like Mexican ofrendas, Day of the Dead, and stuff like that. But field marigold is much smaller and that same beautiful orange color, that really nice glowing color. And this is a plant that will actually deter nematodes and aphids. So nematodes are present in the soil and aphids are typically up on the upper part of the soil. So that's a really cool plant to have in your back pocket. And that grows just like this. This could be easily mowed if you need it to. So that could be planted very easily between the vines. Next is fennel, which I have a picture of that here. But it's a trap crop for insects, and it lures them away from the grapevines. So again, that could be like a sacrificial situation where that plant is sacrificed for the sake of the grapes. Clover is something that's very prevalent here in California. You see it all over soccer fields, the ones that are still grass, by the way, and all over. It's very beneficial for insects. You can see bees love clover, but it also helps to improve soil fertility. And then there's nasturtium, which is this pretty orange plant down here, orange flowering plant. And this is a plant that also attracts beneficial insects. So it's good for the environment. So yeah, I mean, worst case scenario, you plant some plants that just looks pretty around your property. I mean, there's lots of other benefits as well, but something fun that you might enjoy learning about. Cool. So if you have pests, how are you going to sample these pests, right? So it's one thing to know that pests are present, but you kind of need to also know like how prolific this is in your vineyard. Like what's the concentration of this pest in my vineyard? Is it the whole vineyard? Is it just certain spots? How do you sample for this, right? So there's a couple of different ways. One is called the beating tray, which you hold a white tray under a vine, like this guy right here, and then you take a stick and you beat the like branches or the shoots of a vine, right? You shake, or you can shake it as well, and then all the insects will fall off into your beating tray, and then you can count and identify the insects that fall off. You can kind of get some numbers for how many insects you have per vine. You can get kind of an idea of how serious the situation is, right? Another thing you can do is for like flying insects, you can use a sweep net. So it just looks like a cute little bug net you would buy for a kid for catching bugs when they were little. We use it in agriculture too. So this, you can just you can hit the vine to disturb it, and then you can sweep over with the net, catch the insects, and then you can bring them back and try counting them and getting an idea for what you have too. Something that's super common that we see in vineyards are these sticky traps. Sticky traps are just planted at consistent parts of the vineyard. They will sample both the harmful and beneficial insects. They're environmentally like neutral. They don't harm the environment at all. This is just going to give you an idea for what exists in certain spots of your vineyard. So it looks just like this. It's an orange tent, and there's a sticky component here, and bugs are attracted to it and they get stuck to it. And then you can very easily count and identify what bugs you have in your vineyard. There is also one that looks a lot like this. It's a pheromone trap. Oh no, this is a pheromone trap. Excuse me. This is what the pheromone trap looks like. And this is mostly used for moths in vineyards because moths are very much affected by pheromones, and it can help to catch them as well. So that can be something you do. Cool. So how do we know when these pests are going to infiltrate our vineyards? Well, you'd have to have a knowledge of the pest itself, and we have some links in a couple slides to give you more information on that itself. But generally speaking, you can keep track of when your vineyard is at risk by knowing the certain pests that you are deal with in your area, and the cycle of the seasons, and the life cycles of those specific pests or the specific insects or etc. So there's what we have phenology calendars. You can track the cycles of the vines. So you just write on your calendar, like, generally speaking, bud break happens, for us it's early April this year, right? So with that, bugs or these pests like to feed off the vines. So they like to feed off the vines at certain stages. So you can know, like, okay, there's generally an outbreak when bud break happens, or when flowering happens, or not until the fruit comes. So bugs and pests respond and feed off the cycles of the plant. And it goes back to that triangle, right? You have the host, you have the pest, and then you have the right environment as well. So that environment includes whatever that is that they like to eat off of or live off of. So they won't, that pest pressure won't happen until all those three things come into play. So this is tracking the phenology of the vine to see when those pests are going to become a problem. Another way that you can track is through growing degree day models. So this kind of just goes hand in hand with phenology. Plants respond to changes in temperature and sunlight, and so do insects, right? Like, we don't see mosquitoes, thank God, during the winter months because it's way too cold. It's way too cold for those bugs to live. So there's not a problem. But once it heats up and there's a body of water nearby, you're going to be eaten alive, right? So this kind of follows the temperature, the degree growing days, and that will help determine when certain species will soon hatch and then start to breed and become a problem in your area, right? Another way that you can do this is kind of one of the fancy ways, is you can use a drone or an unmanned aerial vehicle, a UAV. Drones can help kind of do the visualization checking process for you. They can take photographic images and attach it to map coordinates of exact vineyard locations and spots, and this can be a visual aid for record keeping as well. So they'll actually fly through and take pictures of the vineyard and pests that are there for you. Okay, so moving on to pest identification specifically for insects. It's essential to determine proper methods for management for insects. Because we don't want to eliminate all insects. We just want to eliminate the one that's damaging our crops. There's a lot of beneficial insects out there, like we've said. So you can look directly at the type of damage that is left behind. That can help. So here we have a picture of what's called like stippling on a vineyard leaf, where it looks like little like, so how do I say this? Leaf hoppers have these little like needle-like noses, kind of like a mosquito, where they go in and then they pierce through the leaf and they suck up all of the nutrients in the leaf. So that's what creates the stippling effect. It's because they literally are eating the chloroplasts and all of the nutrients inside the leaf and then leaving behind this white exterior. So that's an identification of a leaf hopper, right? So generally speaking, for insects, as a broad category, symptoms include chewing on leaves, fruits, seeds, and roots, right? Because you could have phylloxera as well, nematodes. Discoloration or distortion of leaves, blossoms, or twigs. And then we think about discoloration. This could also be a nutrient problem or an environmental problem. So this is not just for insects, right? Tunneling in stems, leaves, or roots is an insect symptom. The sucking plant juices from leaves, stems, roots, fruits, and flowers, also an insect issue. Initiating galls or other plant malformations, and then dieback of part of plants as well, right? So this could be insect. Some of these could be nutrient or just environmental, and then some of this, like dieback, galls, and other plant malformations, could actually be disease. So again, there's some crossover in symptoms between what it could be. So this is where like doing that thorough search of the vine, seeing if you can identify any pests, will be very helpful to determine if this was actually an insect issue, or if this is a disease issue, or if this is a nutrient issue, or something else. So sometimes you have to play like vineyard doctor and diagnose what's going on. Okay, for pathogens, pathogen symptoms are more like necrotic leaves. The leaves are dying back. You can see it's black. So it's necrosis. It could be overdeveloped issue like galls, clubroot, leaf curls, and warts. So we have galls up here, these little bumps that form on the leaf. So that's overdeveloped tissue in response to a pathogen. There could also be underdeveloped tissue like stunting, dwarfing, and some malformations. So you'd see that in the newer growth, right? It wouldn't be nice and long and healthy. It'd be small and shorter and underdeveloped. And then also just generally discoloration of tissue, and also potentially just wilting. And wilting could just be an irrigation problem too, right? So it just depends. You might have a pathogen problem, or you might just need to irrigate some water onto those plants. So pathogens can be caused by virus, bacteria, fungi, and nematodes. Generally speaking, these ones are harder because they require a lab to properly identify them. So it's very hard to tell on your own. It can occur when normal plant production is impacted, so it can be confused with normal environmental, non-organism related stress, right? But the way that you can tell, a way that can help, is that generally speaking, environmental stresses are normally distributed evenly across an entire vineyard, whereas damage from a pathogen is not even. It's typically in pockets or clusters within a vineyard. Typically it'll attack in hot spots, and then it will spread from there. So that can be a way to help identify whether it's environmental stress or a pathogen that's attacking your vineyard. Okay, weeds. The definition of a weed, right? Because it's like, why are we discriminating plants, right? A definition of a weed is a plant that's growing out of place. So it's any plant that is impacting your ability to grow your crops or is unwanted, which is kind of sad. So in this way, it could be a plant that competes with desired plants for resources, so water, light, and nutrients. It can be classified by identifying morphological features such as the foliage, stems, and flowers. They can also be put into groups such as annuals, biennials, and perennial plants. There's a lot more information about this in the textbook, but I just didn't feel the need to go into it in too much depth. We do have a lot of common vineyard weeds, especially in this area. We have star thistle, Johnson grass. These are two that I've struggled with for a long time working in vineyards. Crabgrass, horseweed are a couple examples as well. Star thistle is not fun because it hurts. it hurts. You're out harvesting and you're in the hot weather, you're sweating. If it's really tall and you have to walk through it, it's poking through your pants. It's not a good time. It's very hard to get rid of. It's very hardy weed. And then Johnson grass isn't too much of a hassle because it doesn't physically hurt you, but it is in the way because it grows very tall and it grows very quickly and it comes back every year unless you treat it. So we do have a link here to UCIPM for integrated weed management if you'd like to read more about specific weeds, how to manage it, and how to get it out of your vineyard, basically. So we do have resources for you guys if you would like to learn more. And like I said before, the textbook has a lot of information on weeds as well, so you're welcome to reference that for yourself. Okay, the next step in IPM is establishing action thresholds. So this is a very kind of it's a personal boundary that you draw. You set limits for when pest populations become economically damaging, basically. So every vineyard is going to probably have a small amount of like moths or potentially leaf hoppers or some other type of bug or pest, but it's not necessarily that their pure existence is harming your crops. It's when they pass a certain concentration and threshold that they actually start to become a serious threat to your vineyard, right? So the thought process is not we need to wipe this insect off of the face of our county or the face of the earth. It's more, what is the threshold where this actually starts to economically impact my crops, right? So we want to avoid unnecessary pesticide applications again, and then also the threshold might be determined or will vary between like the type of pest that you're dealing with in the growth stage of your vine, right? There might be some turning points that are more critical than others. Just things to keep in mind before we just go out there and start dousing everything, right? So there are different thresholds to take depending on what's happening in your vineyard. Sorry, I don't have any pictures on that slide. So with that being said, we have like a triangle of integrated pest management like tactics. These are like a series of steps that you can take depending on how severe your problem is, right? So good environmental practices for preservation start with cultural methods, then can progress towards chemical depending on the severity of the circumstance, right? So starting at the bottom, right, we start with prevention, and then the more severe the case gets, it goes into intervention mode, right? So prevention is like good cultural practices, right? We have good sanitation overall in our vineyard. You know, it could be that we're choosing grape varieties that are resistant to these pests or these issues, right? Then we have physical and mechanical situations. So for this one specifically, we're talking about flea, lice, combs, screens, proper clothing. But we do have an example down here for cultural methods. We'll get into that. Then we have biological. So this is like when we are introducing a predator or a parasite to come in and like physically, it's like insect warfare kind of a deal. We introduce a predator to eliminate this pest that's harming our vineyards. And the predator doesn't harm our vineyards. The predator just likes to eat whatever is out there, right? Then we have our chemical intervention. So the more toxic it becomes, we have to use chemicals at that point as a last resort. We have biorational, which are like repellents, oils. This is like more of like the organic farming method. And then we have like conventional chemicals. This is like your super intense, your one-stop shop chemical, and it will kill on contact, right? So it just goes to show that there's a really methodical and reasonable way to approach vineyard issues besides just dousing everything in these chemicals, right? So here's an example of this pyramid that we're talking about, right? So you have a vineyard. Cultural control would include better canopy management to improve airflow and disease pressure, right? So you're preventing mold and mildew from forming by having good canopy management. You have good irrigation techniques. You're also using cultivars that are generally just pest resistant. So you're just setting yourself up for a foundation of success based on your cultural practices, right? And again, it's controlling that environmental piece of the triangle. Then we have mechanical and physical control. So this could be traps, any barriers that you put into place that make it more difficult for that pest to come into your vineyard. Then we have biological control, so introducing natural enemies, so ladybugs, lacewings. Here's a ladybug going to town on all these aphids on a plant. It's just having the time of its life. So this is a very good example of biological control. Then at the last resort, we have a chemical control, which is a targeted pesticide used only when necessary, right? So I just like that example. It's a good example to show the progression of how we respond to these things in our vineyard, right? Common vineyard pests, and we could spend a whole lecture just talking about these pests. If you'd like to learn more specifically about these pests, I have a whole page of resources for you guys. So I know at the beginning of the semester we talked about some specific things that you guys were worried about for your vineyards. Any of these sites will be extremely helpful. This UC statewide IPM literally goes through every single pest that is possible in your vineyard, and it will go through a whole policy or whole process of how to deal with them, how to work against them. So common vineyard pests that we talk about a lot, one is Phylloxera. This is a root-eating louse. It goes through different stages of life cycles, right? It starts as as baby, and then it comes into a nymph, and then it develops wings. Phylloxera leave behind galls under leaves. So that's where they lay their eggs. So that could be a really good sign that you have a Phylloxera issue. Mealybugs are these white-looking bugs that will also destroy your plants. You also have leaf hoppers, and here's that little needle mouth I was talking about that's sucking out of the leaf. Spider mites, big problem for roses, but they also occur in vineyards and other crops as well. Another one that we have is the great berry moth, and that's a situation as well. So again, if you'd like to learn specifically how to handle these pests, I highly encourage you to check out these websites. For this IPM, UC IPM, we have one specifically for agricultural pests. You can scroll down and get to grape. And then there's a section for table grapes, and then wine and raisin grapes. And then they have different times, right? And then you also have general information for insects, mites, other invertebrates, and management, right? So if you specifically want to know about leafhoppers, you can go in and you can learn about leafhoppers, right? It'll tell you exactly what it looks like. There's different types of leafhoppers. There's a variegated, Virginia creeper, the damage that they cause, but then also management, right? And it goes again through those steps. So you have biological control, cultural control, organically accepted methods. This is just such a beautiful grail of information. I'm glad that I could bring it to you guys. This is all from UC Davis's website, by the way. So that was just this first link here, this first site. There are a lot of other sites connected to this presentation, so definitely don't feel shy and dig into that information. Okay, in conclusion, integrated pest management is a sustainable approach tailored to vineyard ecosystems. Again, we want to be sustainable for our environment. We want to take care of the soil and the all of the insects and all the positive things around us. We want to encourage that, right? It requires knowledge, observation, and adaptation for you to be successful with integrated pest management. It takes a lot of time and effort, but overall it's worth it. And it's important because it protects both your vines and the environment. So, very good. All right, so that leaves us with our student learning objectives. So definitely review this before you take the quiz. If you enjoyed the presentation, I'm glad, but I also hope that you dive into the textbook and into our resources that I posted here for you guys. I know a handful of you guys are vineyard owners who have valid concerns in management of pests. Next presentation is going to be on diseases, so that'll be a lot of fun. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you guys Wednesday night. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email or a message through Canvas. And I hope you guys have a good week.